Welcome everyone to Tuesday Tea Time. I am on the back of a horse. I thought I would start this tea time from the back of Cleo for a change. So Cleo is eating some hay. Myrna's eating some hay. And I am, essentially using Cleo as a couch because she's kind of that wide. So tea time today. I've been doing a little bit more riding than usual. Hi, Cleo. And as I've been doing a little bit more riding, I have gotten some questions from students about some things having to do with riding, specifically spooking at objects and bolting. Now, certainly spooking and bolting happen when you're not riding too, but they become bigger issues when you're on top of a horse. So, you can see here I am lounging on the back of Cleo, and I really hope that she doesn't spook and she doesn't bolt. So, welcome, Laurence. Yes, Breezy is here. He invited you all to tea time today. So, Cleo says hi. People often ask me, do horses want to be ridden? And it really depends on the horse. Some want to be ridden, some don't. It depends on their associations with being ridden. As I am lying here on the back of Cleo, it's just one more place to be, like standing beside her or standing in front of her or standing behind her. Cleo doesn't mind having me lie on top of her or ride her. It's something that's easy for us to do together. That's not true for all horses. So, when we ride horses, sometimes things come up like spooking or bolting. And ultimately, people turn to horse trainers like me to solve this. How do I make sure my horse is not going to spook and throw me off? Or how do I make sure that my horse is not going to bolt and be really dangerous? And Cleo's shifting around, so I have to shift around. I'm going to jump off so I can talk to you guys. Thank you for the ride, Cleo. Now, was she shifting around because I'd been up there too long? Was she shifting around just because she needed to get her balance? There's a million different reasons why Cleo might have been shifting around while I was lying on her back. Because I'm in the middle of a conversation with you, I decided that I didn't want to risk it getting worse, and I was going to get off while she was just shifting her weight. She wasn't trying to get rid of me. She wasn't doing anything terrible. It was just hard for me to talk to the camera and also stay focused on being balanced for Cleo. So the idea that horses behave in ways that we can ride is really important when we start to ride them. In freedom-based training, the goal is to never be in a place longer than the horse is comfortable with it, and that includes riding. If you're there for too long, they will start to behave in ways that you don't like. Now, once we have tools, we can really sort of push them to behave well, whether they like it or not. When we take away all the tools, we have a timing issue. How long is too long for that particular horse? Can I get off while they're still enjoying the ride instead of feeling like it's too much? So, Florentine, I'm sorry the Wi-Fi is not working and you can't see us, but hopefully you can watch the replay later. Thanks for joining us briefly. And welcome Eva from Denmark. So these questions I've gotten about bolting or spooking. Basically, all living beings solve problems for comfort. They solve whatever problems life brings them, and they solve them in a way that are going to make them more comfortable, or that they hope will make them more comfortable. So that means that if you are riding a horse and they start to feel uncomfortable for some reason, and this discomfort could be physical it could be emotional, it could be social. There are lots of reasons for discomfort. And when a horse is uncomfortable, they have to solve that problem to become more comfortable. And if their stress is low enough, they will solve that problem by using positive, good social behaviors. They will think their way through the problem. They will yield, which means they'll make space for their friends. And they'll play. They will try different things, pushing into the problem in a way that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. But when stress gets too high, then they are going to defend themselves. And the way they defend themselves is with fight, flight, or freeze. Interestingly, people only think of extreme freeze, like when the horse is about to die. And there's actually a more subtle freeze that usually happens before fight and flight. And what that freeze is it's a fixation on a problem the horse can't solve. So the horse starts thinking about discomfort. And when they're thinking about discomfort, there's a freeze that happens in their brain where they can't stop thinking about it. And when you can't stop thinking about a problem that you can't solve, stress goes up. And when stress goes up, eventually you're going to see fight or flight. And that is what spooking and bolting is. It's where the horse has hyperfixated on a source of discomfort that they don't know how to solve. Christian says, my pony learned from Myrna in Taming Wild to touch one of my feet to leave his back. A very nice way. Yes, that's one way to do it. If your horse has a communication system, is to say, I need this to be easier. What I feel right now is about to be overwhelming. Too much, too soon. And if they can communicate this, then they can keep their stress low and they can solve problems in a way that are community oriented. Now, spooking and bolting is not something they plan usually. It's not something they think about. And it doesn't necessarily mean they were hyperfixating on the thing that they spooked at. A lot of times they were hyperfixating on a different problem. Then all of a sudden they see a shadow out of the corner of their eye, and now there's two problems they don't know how to solve. And what that does is it triggers a reaction. The reaction is to spook violently and to get away from that thing, because that's all that's left when the stress is too high to solve problems in a good way. And so when we have spooking or bolting issues, what we have is a horse that is hyperfixated on problems they can't solve. And then what happens after that is any problems that get put on top of that tend to get a hyper reaction. Now, I have a funny story about this. My very first Mustang, Saavedra, she used to be a big spooker. You'd be riding along the trail and some little leaf would shake or a bird would flutter, and all of a sudden you'd be facing the other direction. And she would always kind of throw me forward, kind of off one shoulder when she spooked like that. And this was really difficult. So when I decided I was going to try and solve this, I thought, and I was thinking pretty simply and literally at this point. I thought, what if I lean way back, so far back that my stomach muscles hurt, and I ride back here. Now, at the time, I was just thinking she can't throw me forward over the shoulder. This was a long time ago. So I rode for a month like this, like all the way back here using my stomach muscles. And what I found is Saavedra never, ever spooked at anything until I leaned forward. Now, it's a number of years later, and I understand this whole situation a little bit better than I did then. What I think her problem was that she couldn't solve was tightness in her muscles through her shoulders. Her shoulders were uncomfortable, and they were uncomfortable because of the way I was sitting. Now, for all of you guys who ride, have someone film you And notice how often you get in front of the vertical. It's super common. We don't realize we do it. We do it a lot. And when we lean forward in front of the vertical without a base of support through our center and our feet, the horse's shoulders have to take that strain. They have to balance us. So you get a tiny bit ahead and you stay there, and the horse's shoulders are balancing you. They're taking on the strain of your weight being a little bit unbalanced. And that's a problem they don't know how to solve. Now, I'm not saying she solved the problem by spooking. I'm saying spooking became the reaction to something she hadn't noticed and suddenly noticed. But it was one more problem stacked on top of the problem she already had. And if I could lean back so far that my stomach muscles were working, and I could ride from back there, it eased the pressure on her shoulders. Her shoulders were no longer tight. She no longer had that problem to solve, which meant things that happened in the bushes, the stuff that used to surprise her, just didn't surprise her anymore. We had gotten rid of enough problems that the little problems that came up now seemed solvable in a community-minded way. And so if you have a horse that is bolting or spooking, you need to think about what's on their plate. What are they focusing on? What are they hyper-focusing on that they can't solve? If you can help them solve for comfort in enough places, then the little problems that come up, like the unexpected log on the trail, will not cause them to jump out of their skin, okay? The problem really isn't that log. The problem is that log on top of all the other problems they're trying to deal with. And same thing with bolting, okay? Horses don't really want to bolt. It's a reaction. It's a reaction to something where they don't know what else to do, and one problem too many has been stacked on, and then you're gonna get fight or flight. So, can you totally get rid of those? Well, people certainly. Cleo wants to say hi. I love that she's so talkative. People certainly do break horses, where horses will go to freeze and not go to fight or flight. They realize that fight or flight always get punished, and some horses can be kind of broken down. When they're stressed, they only freeze. They never fight or flight. But that's not really the solution. The solution is, can we help them learn to solve problems so that they're not overwhelmed? When they're not overwhelmed, they're going to respond to problems in a community-oriented way so that they don't need to spook and they don't need to bolt. So your job is to figure out, what are the unsolvable problems already on my horse's plate? Sometimes it's saddle fit. Sometimes it's the way you're riding. Sometimes it's social organization, who they're riding with. If you can help them solve the things that bother them, if you can solve the things that make them hyperfixate on a problem that is making them uncomfortable, then all the little things that come up become solvable. So I think I missed some comments here. Christian says, it's about the balance issue. Also another problem, same time, adds itself up. Makes absolutely sense to my comment before. Yes. So, we have, Kristen says, I found out that spooking once is often no problem, but if a horse spooks directly after, it most escalates huge. Yep. And that depends on the horse. For some horses, spooking it once is a big problem. It depends on their type of spook. It depends on how dramatic their spooking is. It depends on how dramatic their bolting is. But the real solution to the problem is to help them solve all the little things that make them uncomfortable. The bigger their stack is of unsolvable problems, the harder it is for them to deal with the small ones that come up. And, you know, if you're riding when the spooking is happening, you might really consider my story where, you know, if as long as I rode behind the vertical, and believe me, it looked funny. My students at the time laughed at me, but it was an experiment and it worked. And what I found is after I rode back here forever and my stomach muscles hurt and, you know, I just stayed really behind the vertical. After I did that for a while, then I was able to come back to center without her shoulders tightening up. And when her shoulders weren't tight, she could handle all the other problems life threw at us. But if I leaned on those shoulders too much and I stayed in front of the vertical for too long, or if I let other people ride her who did that, eventually those tight shoulders would become the thing that was just too much for her. She couldn't handle anything else when those shoulders were also tight. So Sal says, you always explain things so well in ways I hadn't thought of but make complete sense. I'm so glad, Sal. You know, I spend all day, every day, doing this stuff, and I feel so grateful to have a community of people in all of you. You send me really good questions, and a lot of times I have to go, let me think about that. And then my brain gets to tick over it all week or month or year, whatever it takes, until I come up with some answers that make sense, or my horses do. I mean, really, the horses are the ones that help me figure this out. So Margaret says, who I'm riding with makes a huge difference to one of my horses. Yes. So who you're riding with is a social problem to solve or not. So who you're riding with is either going to make the horse comfortable or uncomfortable. And horses are always solving for comfort. What do I do to make myself more comfortable? And if they cannot figure it out, that pushes their stress up. The inability to figure out a problem is what raises stress. So, you know, life is full of problems. There's so many things that are constantly challenging us. You know, we're never comfortable all the time. And it may be physical, it may be spiritual, it may be emotional, it may be social. But being able to solve a problem is how you lower stress. So, yeah, absolutely, Christian, experimenting. If you can experiment with, you know, your various solutions to problems, it's better if you have more than one solution to a problem. So those are my thoughts today. Thank you, Cleo, for letting me lounge on your back at the start of tea time. Thank you, Myrna, for keeping us company. And for all of you for joining us. And keep your questions coming. If there's something particular you want me to talk about, let me know. You know, if the question's fairly concise, I can probably answer it. If it's huge, it might be too much for a tea time, but I love thinking about it. So thank you all for joining me for tea time, and have a wonderful day, and I will see you next week.